All right, I am going to call the Town of Southborough Capital Planning Committee meeting to order for Monday, January 24th, 2022. It is 7:30 p.m. I'll note that all members are present, and I do expect both of our ex officio members to be present at some point here shortly as well. First item of business approval, meeting minutes from January 20th, 2022. I didn't expect them to be ready, Joe, so I put if ready on the agenda, but just in case they magically were, so we'll skip that one.
Thanks for having confidence, though.
I do see that our guests from the school are in the audience, so I'm just going to bring them right in. Good evening.
Good evening.
Greg, did Paul want to come in too?
Yeah, Paul, I believe Paul Desmond will be attending as the chair of the region, and Roger Challen.
Okay, I'll bring Roger in when I see him. I do not see him yet. So, Greg, I don't think you've actually had the chance with your crew to meet the full capital planning committee. I know obviously we have spent a ton of time together on the subcommittee with you and Keith, but really we wanted to use this opportunity to really do what we've been doing with all the other town departments, make sure we understand what you're putting forward that's capital in nature for this year, both at the local and regional level. But also I know you and I have had some conversations about the regional capitalization fund as well. So I have it in this order on my agenda. I'm just going to read them out. Then you and your team are free to toggle between each of the items, and then we'll kind of go around the horn, whatever works for all of you. So I have the regional capital stabilization warrant article, the regional water heater proposal for the 2022 annual town meeting, the overall review of the school and regional capital plans, in Finn and Trotter parking lot, discussion of use of school revolving fund for capital expenditure.
All right, thank you, Jason. And Jason, can I have permission to share my screen?
Should be all set.
All right, so first of all, before I share my screen, thank you for this opportunity to present capital projects. And although we're not in person, someday we will be, I'm confident, but it is nice to meet you folks. And also with me this evening is Keith Lavoie, Assistant Superintendent of Operations, and Becky Pellegrino, Director of Finance, and the Chairperson of the Regional Committee, Paul Desmond. So thank you for giving us this opportunity. Just give me 1 minute. All right, so as the chair mentioned, this evening we are going to provide an overview of the regional capital stabilization warrant article, and that will be given by Becky Pellegrino. We'll review the regional water heater proposal for the 2022 annual town meeting, and then we'll speak to both the capital plans of the public schools of Southborough and the regional district. And then lastly, we will review the Finn Trotter parking lot capital project and review the use of revolving fund for capital expenditure. So at this point in time, I will turn it over to Becky Pellegrino.
Hi, good evening, everyone. As Greg mentioned, I am the Director of Finance for the district, and just want to give you a little bit of an overview about capital stabilization funds. I promise you I will not read this entire law tonight, but I will touch on some of the key points that are underlined in this law throughout my presentation. So, Greg, if you want to move to the next. So capital stabilization funds are permitted, as I showed in the previous screen, under Mass General Law. And the way that those are established at the regional level is a majority vote of all members of the Northborough Southborough Regional School Committee. And then it also requires the approval of a majority of the member municipalities. So in this case, we would need to have both member municipalities, both Northborough and Southborough, vote to approve the capital stabilization fund. Once it has been approved at the annual town meeting, there is no further action required by either member community. The fund will be established and the regional school district will be able to utilize this fund for capital projects. And once established, our regional school district treasurer, Christine Tague, would be the custodian of the stabilization fund. So in terms of funding a capital stabilization fund, the ways that money can be moved into this fund is the most obvious is through a line item in each year's annual operating budget. That line item would be part of the annual school committee budget, so it would not require a separate vote by the member municipalities. It would be similar to the OPEB trust that we have established at the district, where we would include a line item in our annual operating budget. The amount to be appropriated to the stabilization fund would be included in each municipality's assessment and would be apportioned based on the regional agreement. After the annual operating budget is approved, the school committee would not have the ability to increase or decrease the amount in the stabilization fund. It is only set through that annual operating budget. However, it can be increased in two ways if needed. The use of excess and deficiency funds that the regional district does have, or through an additional assessment to member towns only by amending its approved budget. And so that would require, again, a vote of the member communities in order to amend our budget. And then any interest that is earned as part of that capital stabilization fund does go back into the account and becomes a part of the balance. So the use of funds. Any expenditures from the fund do have to be authorized by about 2/3 of all the members of the regional school committee. If the funds are to be used for purpose for which the regional school committee is permitted to borrow, so typically we would be borrowing for larger type of items, a school renovation or a construction project, no additional approval is required. But for any other purpose, so let's say we, in any given year, our operational budget, we're seeing a shortfall and we wish to use funds from the capital stabilization fund, the only way that we could do that would be through the approval of the Director of Accounts from the Division of Local Services at the Department of Revenue. And then any expenditures that are made from the stabilization fund transfer into the general fund is not required. We are able to expend directly out of the capital stabilization fund. So this is similar to any of the revolving accounts that the town or the school district may have. If we do have a project that we have identified and we have a budget for that project, if we do not utilize all of the funds towards that project, any of the remaining proceeds would revert back to the stabilization fund when that project has been completed. Also, any unexpended balances at the end of the fiscal year would continue to remain in the capital stabilization fund. And that fund is not part of the district's general fund and also is not included in the Department of Revenue's calculation for excess and deficiency. If you recall, excess and deficiency, we are allowed to maintain a fund no greater than 5% of our operational and also our debt service. So restrictions and amount. We have a similar type of restriction on the capital stabilization fund where we may not exceed 5% of the aggregate amount assessed to the member towns for the preceding year. If we have a larger project and we require to move greater or a larger sum forward, that would need to be approved once again from the Director of Accounts at DLS. And at no time may the aggregate fund balance exceed 5% of the combined equalized valuation of the member municipalities. And then lastly, an annual report must be presented to the member municipalities on the fund. So just a few examples of the deferred capital improvements at Algonquin, and Keith will speak to this a little bit later, but we do have an outside walkway repair of about $65,000, lighting control software and hardware of about $35,000, energy management system and hardware upgrade of $45,000, grounds tractors and equipment replacement $75,000, eyewash infrastructure of $160,000, and then finally weatherproofing, preventative maintenance, caulking, and trim for about $100,000. And these are at the top of the list. A capital stabilization fund would allow us to really project out some of the projects that are needed in coming years, and we would be able to budget for that over multiple years. It would give us the ability, again, to pay outright for moderate range capital expenditures, not requiring us to go out for debt, but allowing us to maintain the building in a thoughtful and I think also fiscally responsible way. Are there any questions on the Capital Stabilization Fund?
Becky, before I go around the panel here, can you just outline, I believe Greg mentioned that Northborough has already voted this in, so it's really waiting on Southborough. When it was voted in and why Southborough, at least the feedback any of you are aware of, why it didn't pass in Southborough originally?
I do know that it was voted in Northborough in 2018 at their annual town meeting. In terms of feedback, Greg, I don't know if you've heard any feedback on why it was not approved.
So I think there was some concern around town meeting members that it was not clear on how the capital stabilization funds would be used. And therefore, I'm not sure that there was an actual vote taken to approve the stabilization fund in Southborough, but it was presented, and I believe it was tabled, if I'm correct.
Mark, does that ring any bells for you?
Yeah, I don't think I mean, I think if Becky had done the presentation that she just did, I think it would have probably gotten a lot more traction back then. No disrespect to Greg, Becky would have done a great job with that presentation, but I think tabled and definitely postponed. I really don't think that it got a fair shot at town meeting. So I think it really hasn't had a fair assessment, by town meeting. Hopefully that can happen this year.
Mark, I agree. I think that the explanation of why a regional school district would want to create this type of fund and how it would benefit its member communities is really important. And I also think it's important to note that there have been no capital projects placed on either community's warrants, I believe, since 2005. So it's been some time that capital projects at the regional level have been presented to both the towns of Northborough and Southborough. And this is just one mechanism for a regional school district to be planful for those known capital projects that are going to occur just as buildings age. And I will share that right now, we have the ability to put any unexpended funds at the end of a fiscal year into excess and deficiency. The only use of those funds is really to lower the member district's tax burden. So there's really, we can't use it for any other reason other than to reduce assessments. And it would be nice at the end of a fiscal year if there were a remaining balance to make some decisions around funding a capital stabilization fund or funding E&D, or a combination of those two. And right now, we just don't have the mechanism to do that.
Okay, with that, I'll go around the horn quickly and see if there's any questions. Lisa?
Just one quick one, Greg. If this gets approved, so you would be looking to have the districts put monies in fiscal year 24 budget?
That is accurate.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's it, Jason.
Okay, Jeff?
Thank you. Maybe it's a question for Mark, but is it too late for this type of presentation to be added to the Springtown meeting? Or warrant article?
Yeah, Jeff, there's already a placeholder for it.
Okay.
Okay, so it's just a matter of, at this point, vetting and recommendation, but something like this is planned to come forward.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had. Appreciate it.
Joe?
How are these projects currently funded?
So
In the end,
typically revolving accounts, rental fees and so forth. And out of any unexpended operational budgets at the end of April or May, we might look at a project, some of these smaller projects, and try to fund them through savings that we occurred through just good budgeting and fiscal management.
Okay, so you're trying to use scraps to fill in the gaps of capital funding. How much is this? How much is this fund scheduled to have in it?
So it's 5%. We're trying to figure out exactly the total that we can accrue in this account, but we're thinking it's 5% of the total operational budget. So it's a little, probably over $1 million. We're thinking, but we have to do some research because there's some other language around equalized valuations of both communities. We have to figure out what exactly that means.
Okay.
So we need to do some research.
And over how many years are you looking to build up that $1 million?
It really depends on kind of the fiscal climate and how a budget unfolds in terms of the appropriated budget and actual expenditures. Typically we've been able to fund E&D at less than 1% of total operational budget. So anywhere between 175 to 225,000 at the end of a fiscal year, depending on, again, fiscal circumstances.
Okay, would that also be on top of what you just showed us, which was about 475,000, I think, somewhere in that range? Would it be on top of that? So we're actually looking to fill gaps of about $1.5 million.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, the projects that were on your list, I think were
yes, correct. Those are just
about 500,000. So
correct.
You're looking to build up $1 million on top of that 500,000.
Correct. And we'll review the capital plan. And I think part of the conversation really is to overview the capital plan so that, the community of Southborough knows that there are some capital projects that we need to think about moving forward, just in terms of maintaining the building. This is one mechanism, this funding source that we could try to move some of these projects forward. But you'll see when we review the overall capital plan, this is a small solution to a much larger funding plan that we would need to create.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, the budget's enormous, this is a very small piece. So this is really just so that sort of at the end of the year, when you have these projects that are loose around, you can do one or two of them and get them sort of out of the way so that you can move on to the next year. Is that pretty much
accurate
what this is?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thanks. I'm good.
Tony?
No questions.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have missed this. How is the stabilization fund funded? Where does that money come from?
So it comes from the appropriated budget. So first of all, the school committee would need to decide through the budget process if it wants to create a line item to fund this stabilization account. So I'll give you an example. So if they put a dollar amount in the budget process of $10,000, that would be funded through the appropriate budget. But at the end of the fiscal year, if there is money that was appropriated that was not expended, then the school committee could vote to either apply it to excess and deficiency or apply an amount to the capital stabilization fund.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Anything else, Karen? So Greg, I guess my one question is related to the town's capital policy that was adopted by the select board. I get there's really, obviously the select board is a different elected body than both the regional school committee and the local school committee. But we have found great success, at least since the adoption of that policy, which basically says that this committee is involved and at least gives kind of a thumbs up or thumbs down, regardless of funding source on capital projects greater than 10,000. So we have had some revolving accounts. We'll probably talk a little bit about this with Finn. Would you be, well, I know you don't have to commit and you can't commit on behalf of future administrations that follow you. Would you be willing, I guess, in the initial years to collaborate with this committee just to help us understand how you're actually using it once you actually have money in the bank, so to say, and then you go in to do the first project, whether it be the walkway, the caulking, et cetera? Would you be open to that sort of transparency? Obviously, our vote is non-binding, but my question is, as long as you're the superintendent, obviously Paul is a member of the regional school committee, would you be open to that sort of approach if done in the right diplomatic fashion?
Yeah, I mean, I think Paul, and feel free to speak as the chair, but I think that is just good practice moving forward. I also will share that, the school committee did develop an access and deficiency policy. And I would imagine my recommendation would be to create a capital stabilization policy as well. And in that policy, we could add language around getting support of the capital planning committees in each of the towns, because I think that's important. So I think that would be a good mechanism. But yes, verbally, I think it's just good practice.
Okay. So I would encourage you, if that is what you and the region plan to do, I would include that in at the end of Becky's presentation or somewhere throughout, because I think it was a great presentation. But I think just that, we all hear about it as taxpayers in this town about transparency, right? And I just think the more we can just show what we're using it for, I think, it usually goes a lot further. So is there anything else on the capital stabilization article that anyone wants to go over before we?
If I could jump in with just a quick comment. First
Sure.
of all, to answer your previous question, yes, I would definitely be in support of, coming for you guys in the spirit of transparency and just a little historical background here. I mean, this precedes Keith coming into his position, which was a year or two ago, I guess, Keith, and even Becky. A lot of these capital projects have been on the list for a long time, and they just keep getting bumped down the road. So this is part of our attempt to stop that and come with some structure and some strategy around this. And I can see, I welcome the whole idea of this committee, which is also fairly new, to help in that whole effort. We'll welcome opinions from all sides. So thank you.
Thank you. So before we move on, I'm going to motion that the capital planning committee support presentation of this article at the 2022 annual town meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call. Braccio?
I'm going to abstain, Jason. I'm going to vote on the Board of Selectmen with this.
Okay. Hark?
Aye.
Palmer?
Aye.
Schoner?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye.
And Malinowski's aye. And my last words on that topic, Greg, before you pass the baton to the next topic, is I would strongly encourage you to do that same exact presentation whenever you're going to advisory for your operating budget.
All right. Thank you, Jason. All right, I'm going to move on. And Keith, I've reordered slides, so don't panic.
Great.
So I think what makes sense next is to really speak to the Northborough Southborough Regional School District FY23 through FY27 capital plan. And before I have Keith go into some greater detail, reiterating Paul's comments that for many, for the past many years, the Northborough Southborough District has had a capital plan, and we've really pushed capital projects off. That we're at a point now where we need a good plan to fund some of these projects. Otherwise, it's just an unfunded liability, and at some point, the facility and operation is just going to need a large capital investment to maintain the facility. So working with Brian Fantoni, who is the Director of Facilities, and Keith Devoy, and also as part of the Operational Budget Subcommittee and the Capital Planning Subcommittee, this is the FY23, FY27 capital plan that Keith will share with you. All right, Keith.
Yes, thank you, Greg. Just a quick point of clarification for the region. We work with our Director of Facilities, Mike Gorman, and he has a long-standing history with this plan. And we really took a lot of time to make sure that we were identifying the deferred list accurately, so that we present an accurate picture of where we are. We do have done a lot of work to maintain Algonquin and its 350,000 square feet over the years. Mike's done a nice job of doing that with a relatively modest budget. And I know that he, Becky, and I are working continuously to pick off the priorities as soon as we can. But you'll see from this capital plan, those items that are identified in rows are the ones that have been deferred for at least a year or two. And from that, we really built a nice priority list up top. So what you're going to hear more about later in this presentation is about the domestic hot water heater needing a redundancy system. That's at the top of the list. And then right below are 2 through 4 priorities, which identifies the software updates that are needed to maintain our HVAC and lighting system. And the outer border, the rim of Algonquin, is in need of some sidewalk and border repair so that we don't incur any additional tripping hazards. Many of those have been taken care of as they pop up, but we do need some more substantial work to get that back to the proper position. And like Becky had mentioned earlier, some of the other items on the priority list, looking for a grounds tractor, eyewash infrastructure improvement, and the caulking of the building, more of the weatherization. And I want to go back to mentioning that, a lot of this work was done back with the 2005 renovation to Algonquin. So we're getting to that point where a lot of those items are starting to show their end of life and are in need of improvement. So we have done some caulking and some trim repair before, but those are items that have been deferred. And now, like Greg said, that's the type of thing that's starting to build on each other. And we'd like to put forth a project that really takes care of a large portion of that. As best we can. The items below there are not any less important, certainly, and do pick on different parts of the facility to make sure we're staying as current as possible. But those have been the identified capital plan items that we've put forth as priorities for this plan and the next years ahead. So before we go any deeper, and I know Greg is going to mention a little bit more about athletics in a little bit, but are there any questions about the priorities that have been identified?
Go ahead. Who is that, Greg?
Yeah, Keith, can I just make one comment, and that
Sure.
is around the caulking project, trim repair, weatherproofing, preventative maintenance, that I know Southborough is a green community. But because the regional district is its own entity, so it operates as if it's its own town, we are looking to work with consultants to put in our application to become a green community of the region, to try to offset some of the costs of those efficiency projects. I know the town of Southborough has had great success, as well as Northborough. So that is one avenue that we're looking for, that particular row.
Jason?
Thanks. So Keith, just for those that maybe haven't seen a regional budget before, these are the gross costs, right, prior to allocation to Southborough, right? And obviously that number changes depending upon the year. But can you just comment a little bit about how that works, just to make sure the committee's all on kind of the same page?
Yes, absolutely. And we'll become a little more clear when we talk about the redundant hot water heater that we are proposing. But it is based on enrollment and the calculation off of enrollment. Becky's done this a few times. Becky, do you want to comment on exactly how that formula is clearly described?
Sure. So in the regional agreement, it is based on the previous 5 years enrollment. So it's an average over we have our numbers as of October 1st of every year. And so we look back at the previous 5 years to come up with the percentage for the assessment allocation for capital projects.
And then just one more clarification before go around the horn. If you focus on row 6 for a second, you're saying the deferred eyewash, like how does that go across? Like, is like column C, the total cost you think is deferred that needs to be dealt with now? Or is just like, I'm just trying to understand the interaction between the 6,000, the 160,000, the 6,000, the 6,000, the 6,000, the 6,000.
Yeah, it's a very good question. That's the complexity of when these things have been compounded over time. The hope is that the total project would be 160, but we could do it in phases. It's not one of those projects where we have to do it all at once. We can be working with our plumbing contractors and things like that and phase it out over a few years. That's why it's broken up differently. And if we were able to keep up with it for about $6,600 a year, we could, push that out as far as we want. But in total, it would be about 160,000 total to upgrade it to where it needs to be.
Okay. Are there any, other than athletics, which I think they're going to turn to Craig on, are there any questions from the committee? I'm not going to go around just by show of hands. Anyone have questions on the top part or anything that Keith has outlined right now? Go ahead, Joe.
I actually have a question to how this list would then possibly interact with what we just endorsed, which was the stabilization fund. Or is this all expected to be passed through the budget and then the stabilization fund will be used for something additional after the fact?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think if we had a stabilization account, we would be looking at moving some of these projects that are in yellow forward and funding them through that mechanism, Joe. And for example, this year, through the town warrant process, we're recommending putting the redundant domestic hot water boiler as a warrant article in the town to the town meeting. The other projects we would try to fund as much as possible through that capital stabilization fund.
So it's really the capital stabilization fund is really an expedient mechanism for you to move the most urgent projects if they don't get
without having to bond and borrow and
right.
To,
Okay.
to go to the
Want to make
community.
sure I was reading that correctly because that's what I anticipated. Okay. Thank you.
And Jason, the other piece that I'll add is that the high school bond is expected to be paid off in fiscal year 27. So again, part of the strategy around deferring is really trying to pay off the bond and then looking at some of these capital projects that we need to move forward. Unfortunately, though, some of the capital projects have just built up to the point where we need a good plan leading up to when the bond is paid off.
Hi, Jeff.
I have a question. So 2 questions. Oh, sorry.
Joe, you're not done?
Well, I actually did want to know what an eyewash infrastructure improvement was for.
In our science labs, the infrastructure that's there is outdated or broken. So it would be making sure they had the proper safety equipment in the lab so they could use different chemicals.
Okay, thanks.
Good, Jeff.
I have 2 questions. I guess the first one is for Becky as it relates to the split between the towns, what it typically has looked like over the past 5 to 10 years, percentage wise between the towns, just to get a ballpark of what this town is looking at. That's my first question. I think you're on mute.
60-40 has been
In favor of Northborough.
correct.
Okay.
60% Northborough, approximately 40%
Okay.
in Southborough.
Okay. And then the other one's more of just a comment. We developed a policy that presented to the board and it has to do with kind of how we prioritize our capital projects. And I would kind of be interested to see how that lines up with these projects. And there are certain things that we prioritize, those that relate to safety or other items. I'm not going to remember them offhand, but I'm just curious if we could maybe potentially line those up against this list here to make sure that we're thinking about these kind of in congruence with one another. I can understand the eye wash and other things like that, but more of a comment and maybe of a kind of a takeaway from this. So.
Yes.
Sure. Go ahead, Keith.
No, that's very fair. And, I think we worked closely on Northborough this year for some of the, their capital planning board and how they would like things organized. So I certainly can, dovetail the two pretty nicely and do it separate if needed or similarly, and we'll maybe take the best of both. But yeah, I think we could definitely work on that, Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And actually, Paul, really to you, it might be worthwhile creating some type of policy around how do we prioritize similar to Southborough. So looking at that policy as kind of a model for the regional district might be something we want to consider moving forward.
I think Jeff's comment's a great one, right? As we try to obviously evaluate these needs against the many other things that are coming in front of us from various towns. But I also want to be cognizant of, obviously, we are, as you just mentioned, the 40% partner here on average. And, if it would be helpful and we could facilitate, I'm sure good minds can reach consensus in terms of if there is, some way we can dovetail how Southborough thinks about things and how Northborough thinks about things. There may be a few exceptions, but my guess is I don't want Keith having one schedule for Southborough, one schedule for Northborough. And obviously I think we have a job to make all of your jobs a little easier. So as you think about this conversation, Keith, don't be afraid to link us up. If it would be helpful for one of us to meet with our counterparts on the Northborough side, I think we can make that certainly happen.
Thank you for the offer.
Karen, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I'm trying to completely understand this schedule, and I just noticed the FY23, the capital improvements are around 660, and then it goes down in the subsequent years. Is this all the capital projects that we are aware of right now, and those outer years will be higher as we become more aware of what capital projects need to be completed in those years?
I think that's very fair, Karen. I think these are the things that have been identified as deferred up to this point. And, hopefully we're not adding more and more onto the list, but yes, it is predicted that as things get prioritized and deferred, that list does change. It is fluid and it has been different every year that I've been working on this so far. So yes, I would say definitely that's a good way of taking a look at this.
Okay. Yeah, and the follow-on question to that is it beneficial from a budget approval standpoint to have capital spread out more evenly across years, or does it not matter so much?
That's a good question. It would, however, sometimes it's good to package the project all together because it can't be divided. Like, for example, doing the software and hardware upgrades for the lighting system and HVAC, you can't do that separate. You have to do that kind of all together. So it can't be parceled out over a couple of years as one example, but every project is a little different. Obviously the hot water heater that we could have done something a little different at that, but we are getting to the end of the life expectancy. That's why that's bubbled up to 120K.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Not seeing anyone else. So my only reaction to some of this is I think you're all being a little shy in what you're asking for. And I appreciate the fiscal responsibility that you're showing. And I know you obviously are dealing with 2 towns and 2 budgets, but if you're deferring items, particularly around safety in a regional school, I would strongly encourage you to think about if there is a way to package it. And keep in mind that each town does go out and bond. Sorry, let me ask this question. Do you bond at the regional level if you were to do a bond package, or does each town have the ability to bond a portion of this, because obviously each town does bonds every year for their own reasons for other projects.
The regional district would be able to bond on its own.
So I would just say if there are any synergies or safety items, we do continue to be obviously in a historical low period of interest rates. And I know you're working towards that magical 2027 date where this all goes away from the larger items that you've been carrying for many years. But I would just strongly encourage you, if there is something you're holding back on, to at least really make sure that the communities are aware of it and understand, what that delta is. Is it an extra $20 on someone's tax bill? Is it an extra $200? Just so then we can make decision, as opposed to, this deferred list it's long. And obviously it's not going to get any better because there's just unknowns that you're all going to be facing going forward. I don't want my taxes to go up either, but you obviously have a balance that needs to be struck.
So the other topic on this table that I'd like to speak to is really in FY24. And just will provide you with some context around the athletic complex. So the athletic complex at Algonquin Regional High School has been a topic of conversation, I would say, for the past 6 to 8 years, specifically some of the safety features. So the track has been a concern. It has been patched and repaired for many years. The lighting, so the lighting is obsolete. There are dark spots on the actual field. So really, we've been working with boosters for the past 6 years around thinking about what would it take to upgrade the athletic complex. Boosters worked with, and the district partnered and worked with Gale Associates about 6 years ago to do some just conceptual drawings of what a synthetic turf field, new lighting, a new track, and a potential practice field would look like. This fall, the district engaged with Gale Associates to do a more in-depth study for Gale Associates to have a schematic design, an accurate price. They're doing geotechnical, really making sure that we have a good sense of what this project would cost and what any hurdles or obstacles would be. Gale Associates is in the middle of that work right now and is going to have a project plan presented to the regional school committee this spring. The goal is to present that to the school committee and then bring the project and present the project for information to both towns at the town meetings this spring, answer any questions and provide an overview. And then in fiscal year 24, potentially bring this as a larger project to both of the communities. So a lot of discussion and a lot of conversations need to be had around this. And I think right now, Gale Associates is doing the detailed work and preparing a presentation to answer any of the citizens' questions at the town meeting.
I see a hand up from Lisa.
Hi, can you just go back to that spreadsheet for 1 second, Greg? Sorry.
Sure.
I just had a question on under the athletic complex. It listed under athletics number 3 and 4. And it looks like when you go over to the total, it's doubled under the turf and the concession stand. So is the 5.9 or the 7.2 the actual number? If you go over to the right to the total?
Yeah, so that's double counted. Lisa, you are correct.
You're correct.
Okay, so it's actually the 5.9 is the actual number. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
And these are based on some of the conceptual drawings and initial conversations with Gale Associates. And I will share that what we've asked Gale Associates to do is to create phases for us so we can phase in potentially if the project is too large to do all at once.
Okay, so you're looking to fund that. Just one last question. You're looking to fund the whole complex in 24.
That is our current thinking.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe before I go around on that, if that were to come forward, would that be part of the regional assessment because the schools would be bonding it and there wouldn't be like a separate article at town meeting related to it? Is that how this would work? Or would there be a separate article that then gets included in the regional assessment? How do you typically do that?
Becky, do you want to take this?
So yes, it would be a separate article. It would have to be approved by both member communities in order for the regional district to go out for bond.
And so it would
And it'd be-
require the 2/3 as opposed to the 1/2 that your operating budget requires.
Correct.
And it becomes part of the statutory apportionment of the budget in terms of debt service.
Are there any questions from the committee on this one?
I just had one question, just in relation, money from the capital stabilization fund wouldn't be used for a project like this, correct?
The value of, the cost of this total project is too large to even consider that as a funding mechanism.
Thanks.
Maybe a question for Paul when this comes in front of you in the region. Would be interested to hear what your plans are in terms of, obviously, if this was a building, we'd form a building committee, you'd have certain parameters around it. Are you, given that a project of this size is going to obviously take a large amount of support required in both communities, is there a plan to form a group to be able to vet the plans and bring it forward to town meeting outside of regional school committee membership, or is it too early to tell? That's the question. I don't expect an answer now, but that would be something I'd be interested in knowing as this progresses.
Fair question. We've had a group actually looking at this project for, I don't know, Greg, a couple of years now, at least, between boosters and some other interesting stakeholders. So we've certainly been thinking about, how best to present it to town meeting. That's why we came up with this plan to have the informational session first, and then in a subsequent year, actually put an article on the warrant. So, but yeah, your point's well taken, and we will certainly do our best to vet as well as we can.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about the execution on the back end. If you're fortunate to get it through 2 town meetings, how do we keep it ring fence it within whatever number gets approved? I think it's been some of our experiences. Final question on this is, I know Greg and I have had a conversation about it, is I believe both communities have community preservation. And I think a good chunk of this would certainly qualify. I have no idea how it works when you're in 2 different communities. But I would just ask that, that be vetted, especially I know we've heard, at least in this year, Southborough's applications are very light. Obviously, you're not going to bring this forward this year, but there would be, not that there's ever a lot of money sitting there, but it would be something we'd want to get on their radar before it gets allocated away to some other project. I think one of the things we learned last year was they didn't have a good insight into the capital pipeline. So we're toggling with the idea of how much to bring forward to town meeting in any one year, not knowing what they were jeopardizing moving forward. So I don't even know if we can use it for this, given it's obviously, as you called it, your own town doing it, but I would encourage you looking that way too, because that will probably be a lot more palatable.
I think there's an appetite on the Northborough, the town of Northborough to investigate that further as well. I've had conversations with Mark and Mark's counterpart, John Kader in Northborough about this.
I brought it up with Andrew Mills. I just talked to him after one of the last town meetings, and I think it was the one where they had just spent all the money they had. So it was kind of a moot point at that point.
Right.
Okay. What's next, the water heater?
So next is the redundant hot water system replacement expansion project, and I will share my screen and have Keith continue.
I think the athletic complex is a lot more engaging than a redundant hot water heater, Greg.
Some might argue with you, Keith.
Some may, I suppose. So thank you. I do want to go into a little more detail about our redundant hot water system that we're proposing. And we do hope that this can become a warrant article for both communities to get this project done. And as you saw, it was identified as the #1 priority in our capital plan. So a little of the history. The hot water heater is one of the only systems at Algonquin without a level of redundancy. All of our major systems, including the boiler system, the heat pump system and cooling system, all have a redundancy, which avoid us from having a single point of failure. This has been very important, obviously, during our heating and cooling seasons, but certainly we do not want to be without hot water. So that's one of the things. The system has been running great, but we're coming to the end of its life expectancy. So it was part of the 2004 renovation, but at that time we did not have the redundancy built in. And we're getting up to the life expectancy of the current system, getting up to about 20 years. We aren't seeing any signs of failure, but this is not one that we want to push beyond this year as best we can. So our plumbing contractors have been in consult with the Director of Facilities, Michael Gorman, about developing a scope of work and really looking at the different options that we have available to us. So we are looking to not only replace the current boiler and storage tank, but also add an additional boiler to gain that redundancy. Our plumbing contractors are, like I mentioned, looking at the scope of work and what is possible. We are also looking at maybe some greener options that would make this even more palatable with different grant opportunities. So our contractors are well invested in this, and we're trying to get the best scope of work developed to present accordingly. And we are estimating, preliminary estimates does have the project in total being $180,000. So here is a picture of what we have now, the right being the boiler and the first tank being the domestic hot water storage tank. We do have plenty of room within the footprint to add the additional boiler, so that will not be a problem at all. And I'll turn it over to Becky for the assessment. And this is a great example, Jeff, of how the breakdown would occur for this type of project. And we still have to update and finalize these numbers, but this will give you a good idea. Becky, do you want to take this part?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we do look at our enrollments as of October 1st. So as you can see, the breakdown of the Northborough and Southborough enrollment as of this past October 1st, 2021, that breakout for Northborough is 61.08% and Southborough it's 38.92%. If we were to estimate this, Northborough's exposure would be $109,944, and then for Southborough it would be $70,056.
Great, thank you.
Excited on that topic, Keith?
That is.
Okay. Lisa, you have your hand up?
I do. Thank you, Jason. Just a quick question, and thank you for sharing the information that you did, but how solid do you feel the 180,000 number is with the issues that we're seeing in supply chains and everything? Are you fairly confident that you'll be able to get what you need and it'll fall within that window?
It does feel that way, Lisa. That is a pretty current quote considering all the obstacles that are involved, and our contractor wouldn't steer us in the wrong direction. So we're feeling pretty good about it. Now, if we were to uncover anything, radical there, I don't expect it because it is a relatively simple system. It's not like we have to peel back walls to see what's behind it. It is right in front of us. So it's a matter of the equipment. It's more about the approach. If we do go with a different, a solar option or something like that, it might fluctuate a little bit, but I'm hoping that 180 will capture everything.
Okay, so there's no issue with supply chain on getting the unit that you need at this point that you foresee?
Not the type that we're looking at now. It doesn't seem like it would be. If we're able to move on it, we would be able to hopefully get it done this summer.
Perfect. Thank you.
Joe?
Yeah, I know this isn't a huge item, but my question would be, what's the downside and what's the replacement time necessary if the current one went down?
It would probably be had to be done through an emergency procurement, and it would certainly be a couple of days.
So and what would be the damage in the couple of days?
We would not be able to have the building be open. without
Okay.
domestic hot water. We'd have to
Yeah.
close the facility.
But
Keith, the only thing I would add is to Lisa's question too, that would be assuming, it's not a long lead time to install. It's
Right.
getting the parts, getting the what we need to be able to actually get it installed. And I think this is a proactive approach rather than having it break and causing some type of serious issue in the middle of schooling. This proactive approach would allow us to prepare and plan for the implementation of this project.
So we're really getting ahead of the failure is what we're doing.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And what's the normal lifespan on these? About 20?
20 years.
Okay. So we'd be in the replacement range as we sit anyway.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear you talk about, pursuing potential greener options when you're looking at the water heater. And I'm just wondering, what considerations do you have with going greener or not going greener?
Well, certainly we added the PV panels on the roof last year, and we're starting to see that project come to fruition, which is great. So through those avenues, we're trying to explore whether or not we can capture or our battery the source so that we can store it for longer. I don't believe tankless options are available to us. I think we do need to have that storage tank, but it's a matter of how to fire up and power the boiler. And maybe we can do it through alternative methods other than just natural gas.
Thank you.
They were talking about a lot of funky things that require different, components and things like that, like electric heaters and things of that nature, was most of the stuff I was hearing so far. But it's going to be interesting to dig deep with the contractors and see what they can put together for us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Anyone else on this topic? So, Mark, is the intention to take this article, get a more precise allocation, and put it as part of the town's capital appropriation from a warrant article perspective?
I think that'd be the path forward unless you have a suggested other path forward.
I'm just trying to think of how the warrant's closed, right? I know we talked about this item was coming, so that's probably our only path unless I'm not aware of.
Well, you could take, you do have your capital articles, so you could put it in the capital articles and then decide to break it out into a separate article. So
Okay. I'll leave that to you and Greg to figure out how best to do that.
I'm happy to round the corners however you figure it out.
So in terms of when would we have a final allocation, Becky? So because we need to motion what number to put in the warrant. So I'm debating whether I motion the 180 subject to Southborough's allocation or I motion the 70-ish in change.
I can get you numbers, I would say, over the next day or so. But you may want to do the 180 subject to Southborough's allocation.
Okay, so I'm going to move that the Southborough Capital Planning Committee recommend the 180,000 redundant hot water tank for the Algonquin Regional School District, subject to the appropriate Southborough allocation.
Second.
Seconded by Jeff. Any further discussion? All right, Lisa,
Abstain.
Jeff,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Tony,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye.
All right. Next, we'll move on to the Southborough capital plan and the Mary E. Finn School paving project. And I will turn it back over to Keith for a review of the capital plan.
Excellent, Greg. Thank you. Obviously, a little different format than we have at the Reg. We do break things out by school. Some of these items are also not new. Actually, all of these items are not new to the list except for one. We did add a rooftop air conditioning unit down to Trottier for the auditorium, which has been something that we've been attempting to repair multiple times, but it is looking as it would be an item that we need to move forward with in FY24. But if we do start at the top, and if you look at the columns just beyond the deferred list, which is in gray, the two items that stick out are one, the paving project at the Finn School, and then the paving project at Trottier. Those are two that have risen to the top as priorities that we'd like to take care of. And like we're going to mention in a couple of slides is looking towards our revolving account to be able to take care of a majority of certainly the Finn project. One thing we have learned is that the prices of these types of projects are dependent upon fuel and are going up probably as I speak right now. So one of the things we're going to talk about in a little bit is how we're going to collaborate with the DPW Superintendent Carrie Galgan to figure out maybe some other different mechanisms of how to bid this project to move our dollar forward. But when we start looking out over the years of the different schools, you'll see that many of the items here are ones that are going to come up to their life expectancy, whether they are energy management control systems. Certainly, the roof at Trottier is something that has been a problematic for years. We're in a decent position now where we can wait another year, but that is something that we're going to be bringing forth as a pretty significant project in the near future. But it is not a new one to the list. I can speak firsthand that the Trottier roof has been a problem for a while, and that's why it still remains on our capital plan. And certainly the conversation around the Neary School and all that needs to be done there, that's no surprise. The infrastructure there, it's got good bones, but certainly the things around it, the systems around it do need a significant upgrade to remain current. So there are a bunch of different items here that span from parking lots to roofs to mechanical systems for the different schools. And I do want to thank Brian Fantoni, our facilities manager in Southborough, for keeping an eye on these and making sure that we prioritize them accordingly. And you will see that layout as the year unfolds. So I don't know if there's any particular questions on a particular project. I'd be happy to explain in further detail.
See Jeff's hand up and then Lisa.
My mute, no. The EMS in Woodward, is that specific to a school type of building, or would that be, I'm just thinking through kind of some of the other plans in place. Would that be a cost that's going to be incurred regardless of what the plan is with Woodward?
It probably would be something that would have to be considered for upgrade in the next 5 years or so. Yes.
Okay.
All the mechanical systems would still be intact, the boiler and all of the systems that the energy management system would control would still be in play.
It would. That's true. But one of the pieces with that, Jeff, is just a lot of the different control cards and the different components of the energy management system, the different sensors and things like that are ones that we're having a tough time finding. So what we're seeing is that, we'll have to look towards a replacement in the next five years or so.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Lisa?
Great, thank you. Just a quick question, Keith, on Neary. For the feasibility study and the roof replacement being in the same year, I would imagine, depending on the feasibility study, and again, this is certainly not my forte, but just generally from what we've heard, you would want to do, just so I'm clear, that you want to do the roof replacement and the feasibility study the same year? No, Jason's shaking his head no.
Keith, isn't line 24 the key here, if no renovation?
Correct.
But you won't know about a renovation until you do the study, correct? Am I doing it? I'm thinking of it out of sync?
So this is, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know we've had some discussion around this at the subcommittee level. You have the feasibility in FY24,
Mhm.
But really, we actually have a placeholder in the FY23 capital plan right now for this. So Lisa, I think your question may be answered. If town meeting were to support a feasibility study in whatever month you all decide to have the meeting,
Yeah.
then your question goes away.
It
If
does.
it gets punted, then it's kind of if-then statement, probably.
Okay,
Yeah,
fair enough.
I would definitely agree with that, Jason. Greg, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I would just add that this was approved on
Right.
November 8th. So a lot has happened since then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jason, as well.
Any other questions on this? I guess I'll offer my comments. The paving, it seems like Finn is the priority, correct?
Correct.
But you still have, and I know Greg just mentioned this was approved in November. Is Trotter definitely going to move back, or are you going to wait and see how the bid comes back on paving and see what your revolving accounts end up being?
It is likely just with some of the preliminary estimates that we're finding when we're trying to get the scope of work together to put together the bid for it, Jason. But, when I was speaking with Karen this morning, we were thinking about, it's always good to think ahead and have that next set of list of items available, especially when it comes to paving. So I think when we are able to sit down and really talk about what that bid will include, we'd like to at least entertain a bid for Trotter to see how it comes in, and then see what we would be able to manage. I do think, though, it's a little wishful thinking that we'd be able to do both, considering what we would have available to us.
So, Keith, and I'll just add that when the plan was developed, we were thinking that we would do a portion of the Finn parking lot and a portion of the Trotter parking lot.
Right.
And after rethinking about what makes sense, our priority would be completing the Finn parking lot. So that is done, and putting that off and completing that project, and then moving on in subsequent years to other parking lots, and Trotter would be next in line.
Okay. My next comment is on the rooftop air conditioning unit.
Mhm.
I know you have that's obviously 1 year out.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're aware or not, but the town just got $100K earmark in the ARPA bill related to HVAC. I'll defer to Mark on whether that is a town-specific building or a school building or open for discussion, but I just think we should all coordinate on that unless it has to be used on a town building. So Mark, I don't know if you want to reply to that piece.
I'd have to take a look at that and see, Jason. I'll put that under the category of up for discussion, just until we get some more information.
Okay. And then I would probably caution with my school research subcommittee hat on that I know the 800K is a placeholder, but we're probably in the next couple of months going to have to figure out what number that is. MSBA gave us a range, but
Right.
then it's a question of are we bringing that forward with or without MSBA? So just so everyone's a notice, I don't think we should be holding Greg or Keith to that number.
I'd appreciate that.
Final comment is on the roof replacements. Those are probably accelerated repair type projects. Do we have
They
to do a
would be, yeah.
separate application for each one?
Yes, they require two separate statements of interest.
So we wouldn't be able to bundle them in the same year, so to say, unless MSBA was okay with both in the same year.
I don't believe so. I think, well, they have to be submitted as two separate projects, but I think they would be considered, perhaps bundling them together, but because they are around the same age, so it might fall into that, but I think it would remain separate.
Yeah, they would look at each project independently. Potentially, they could fund both of the roofs, but they would be separate statements of interest. And our intention is to continue to file those statement of interest for the roofs through MSBA's accelerated repair project, because there's no commitment to file and to go through the motions. There's still a lot of decision making that would need to be moved forward if it was accepted.
And if we were to get MSBA funding for NERI, it's likely that our chances of an accelerated repair project are going to be lower, not eliminated, right? But they would be lower, is my understanding.
Potentially. I mean, I think there's a lot to be determined in terms of what funding will be moved forward through MSBA as a result of any federal funding that the state gets. But I think that is an accurate statement, Jason, as it stands today.
Okay. All right. Is there any other questions on Southborough Schools capital plan? Is there any other items you all had for us?
So the only other presentation we had was a little more detail around the Finn school paving project, and I'll turn it over to Keith.
Great, Greg. Yes, and Jason, I'll try to move this forward a little quicker, but just to give you an idea of the scale and scope of what we'd be dealing with for the entire Finn project. So certainly it was part of the renovation back in 1998, and we have been partnering with DPW since then. We've had a couple of problem spots that have been repaired frequently with patches and crack sealing throughout. And certainly the highest priority of the entire campus would be the front of the building. And I don't think that's a surprise. That is where we get the highest level of traffic with the heaviest vehicles. And that has just put a lot of pressure on the pavement. And we are seeing multiple sites of failure on that. We have, checked with DPW numerous times. Karen's been out to the site countless times, and it is at a position where doing repair to this any further would not, it is just not lasting. So it does look like a complete refurbishment is necessary. We're also looking at improving the actual type of asphalt that's used in the front, so it will withstand a higher weighted vehicles. So that is part of the work that we're doing now to prepare the bid documents. So that is the scale and scope of the front. Here is the side. This would be right out front of the gymnasium. And now you can see the picture to the right. This is just some of the patchwork that has been done over the years. It would not include the parking lot that is actually directly connected to the Mooney Field. So that would be where that part of the project would be cut off. And then the back, believe it or not, the pavement does go from one side of the building all the way around to Richards Road on the west side. So it does go the entire length around the building, and the area in the back, probably the area of highest concern is right in between, in the middle of the building, almost in that courtyard area. This is where you see that middle picture where there's drainage and a sewer manhole that would need to be addressed. So we're looking at the project. Certainly, we're trying to collaborate with DPW, and if it is advantageous, we'd more than likely welcome the opportunity to do it together. Certainly, if we were to go out on our own bid process, this would begin in February. We'd be doing the review in March, and then the hope would be able to get this completed before the start of school, which would be included in our specifications for the job. So we have done work with a few of the contractors in the area, and it seems very reasonable that if we're able to move forward within the next 60 days or so, we should be able to get this done in time for the beginning of school. And a little bit about the revolving account, and I can turn it over to Becky for that.
Yes, so we do intend to utilize funds that we currently have in our school property revolving account. Those funds have been derived from rentals that we have, worked with our Southborough Extended Day program, and then also some of the youth basketball programs. And we do intend to utilize those funds just as we did for the Woodward driveway paving project. And then also this past fall, we were able to utilize those funds for the emergency electrical panel repairs up at Trottier. This is permitted under Mass General Law, Chapter 71, and those funds do have to be used for the upkeep of our facilities.
Are there any questions? All right, so I'm going to make a motion consistent with what we've done with other revolving fund requests that have come in front of us to support the use of revolving fund the school revolving account to fund the improvements as described for the Finn School parking lot. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Shoner,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Anything else for the school administration?
Thankfully for you folks, no.
Well, thank you for a great presentation. It was great. Much appreciated.
And thanks for all you guys
Thank
do.
you.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
for
good
the
night.
support. Have a
Thanks
good
for
night.
coming, Paul.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. I am going to move to item 5 because I see Karen is here, and then we'll go back to 4 if everyone's okay with that. I'll move Karen in. We have 2 items from Karen tonight that we haven't taken official action on yet related to the warrant, which I think Mark would love us to take some action on so he can work with the boards to move things forward. The first is probably the easier discussion is the Newton Street water main. We've already approved the concept. We discussed the feasibility last year that was voted at town meeting. We discussed the concept of doing it again here this year. I guess the question for you, Karen, is what number to include, leaving all of the discussion we've all had already about reallocation of Route 9 funds. But do we have a number there yet? And if not, when will we have the number so that Mark knows what to put in the warrant?
So I got an updated number this evening. So 2.5 million total for the whole replacement.
And that's what we've been carrying, ironically enough. So you're saying you have, that's from an outside third party that has provided that?
It's yes, it's our the engineer's estimate for the work.
And the engineer is the one that did the feasibility that was funded at last year's town meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the action for capital here is we've already supported the concept. This is obviously something that doesn't come out of the tax rate. It comes out of the water fund. The question is, what, if any, more due diligence we want to do on the 2.5? I'll share my opinion. If we've hired someone to do a feasibility and that's what they're showing, I think that's what we go to town meeting with. The other thing I have learned, and Karen, keep me honest, is we will actually have a formal bid on this before town meeting, especially if town meeting gets pushed into April, May-ish timeframe. So we would have the ability to adjust downward, right? We can't go up once the warrant's printed, but then it's obviously a strategy of when Mark prints the warrant, if I have that right. So I welcome anyone correcting those facts, but we will have a good number, right?
Yes, we're planning on bidding. We should have a number. We should have a bid open by March, sometime in March, not by
Okay.
March, by the end of March.
All right. So are there any questions for Karen on that before I make a motion? All right, then I'm going to move that the Capital Planning Committee support the Newton Street Water Main Construction Project for 2.5 million. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call, Braccio,
Abstain.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer. Joe, you're on mute.
I said aye. Aye.
Shoner,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. All right, next is road maintenance. So just to make sure, especially our newer members are all on kind of even ground before I turn it over to Mark and Karen, is historically, for as long as I can remember, and I'm sure this predates any of my involvement with a board or a committee, the town has allocated a certain dollar amount to road maintenance. we didn't always spend it in the year it was allocated. Sometimes it accumulated into a certain amount, so it created synergies to go out to bid. The number has fluctuated in years. People have studied what's the right amount to get to a certain project over a 2 to 3 year time period. The request on the table this year is 400,000, and we're being asked to weigh in. The select board and advisory are kind of waiting on us to either say up or down or what our number is if it's not 400, so that they can advance some other things. So for any of you that haven't followed what's happening in other boards and discussions around this, I think there's general discussion around how road maintenance money is allocated, how Chapter 90 works, which is the state funding that matches a portion of this, and obviously many other grant packages that Karen has started to take advantage of with complete streets, shared streets, and many other grants that we won't go into in great length. So I think that the question on the table here is to determine whether 400 is the right number to recommend a town meeting. And if it's not, what is the right number? And if it isn't the right number, why we think that, so that, you know, other people can discuss. Ultimately, this is a recommendation. It's not binding upon anyone. It's ultimately up to the select board what they choose to include in the warrant, and obviously advisory will weigh in. Joe, I'm going to have you hold your question for a second, and I'm going to let Mark kind of explain what he and Karen have done based on feedback at other boards and committees, and then we can dive into any details that anyone wants to do. So Mark, I'll turn it to you.
All right, thanks, Jason. So I'm going to just give a broad brush, I think, and taking a look at some of the road projects. I will say that right up front, I'm not going to do the justice to it. You know, that Karen might, in terms of having the command of the buckets and the numbers. You know, as Jason had kind of alluded to, there's a number of different buckets that that these projects are funded from. Chapter 90, you know, is the money that we receive from the state each year for based on our number of road miles. That's about $430,000 a year now. Every year we accept a new town road, that mileage gets added in, that number gets bumped up a little bit. And we have adjusted this number for the local road money that we've put in just about every year, at least since I've been here, and Karen can give more of a historical perspective than that, but there's always been something in for local road money to kind of match the money, or to blend with the money that's coming from the state. Now, the process that Karen has liked to use in the past several years is trying to build up that account with the annual allocations of road money in Chapter 90, so that we can put out a larger bid to accommodate a number of projects at the same time, and, you know, to get the bigger bang for the buck in terms of pricing and in terms of the amount of work that can be done. So as you'll see with what's going on now in town, and some of the projects that you may be aware of with the Main Street project, the second half of Main Street, some of the work with the Shared Streets project on 85 and St. Mark Street, and Newton Street, things, a lot of these projects, this takes time for her to build up the money in the fund to be able to then put out the bid to fund the work to get it done. So normally it's a couple of years before you do something big like this. The projects that I just mentioned and a couple of others that Karen could add on to are already, you know, the funding is in place. This additional complete streets grant of 379, Karen? Yeah, $379,000, you know, did help to offset some of the work that was being done for the CSX crossing in the downtown area as part of the Main Street project, as well as the Newton Street project. But if we are to put out another bid to get, again, the biggest bang for the buck, with the number of projects we can do and the volume of work that we're looking to do, then Karen is requesting that, you know, that we have another $400,000 in local money added this year to offset the approximately $434,000 that we'll be getting in Chapter 90 money. And There also, I think it was alluded to by the schools before Karen got here, but there is a synergy between the work that the school is looking to do with the paving at the schools and Karen's contracts, because we have been able to get a better price. So I think that some of the numbers that they may be giving you may be a little high based on the numbers they're getting. If we blend them in with the town contracts, we may see some savings there. And so there's a number of other projects that that Karen is taking a look at right now and evaluating as to whether they could be things that would be done in fiscal 23, or at least put out as part of a bid in fiscal 23. Jason, I think that information had gone out, and apologize for the lateness of it. But there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving pieces and a lot of numbers with a lot of these things. And I think trying to find the best way to give it to you so that you had a sense of some of the projects that are under consideration. Again, there was a total of about, $5.3 million in projects under consideration. Obviously, all of those aren't going forward. But just some of the things, just a broad brush of the things to be considered that would be put into another bid, coming out sometime later this spring. So that's the 400,000 is part of the funds that we're hoping are available, along with the Chapter 90. And the money that would be residual from the other projects that are underway, I think that totals about $1.47 million to be able to put, a bid together, which would allow some additional work to be done on some of the roads and some of the streets. And again, Karen can probably provide more information depending on how deep you want to go into the rabbit hole.
So really, to summarize, if we recommend a 400K article, Karen will have approximately 1.4 million to go out to bid with for another project this spring. If we do nothing, then she'll have about $1 million, which is borderline whether you go out to bid or not. That does not include any of the school sort of projects that we just heard about, but obviously that would sweeten the pot for someone. And I think it's also important to note, because I think it's been mentioned in other committees, that the current project that has already been awarded would drain the road maintenance money. That's not correct, right? I think the details that Karen provided us show that there's about $636,000 before any new allocations of Chapter 90 or town meeting funds that are just carrying over from historic articles. So we're starting with something. It's obviously not a ton, but it's something for roads. And then we know we're going to get Chapter 90, approximately the 434. So it's really a question of whether we want to add on to that to allow for additional work to be completed. And Karen has provided a sampling of all the things that she needs to start to think about, but obviously cannot think about with just 1 year of allocation, and turns into a much broader conversation with ARPA and other funding sources that may come, more broadly from the state Fed. So I'm going to pause there. Karen, is there anything you want to add before I just let the committee ask questions so they can form a view?
No, probably be best just to have questions.
Okay. I'm going to go in reverse order. Karen?
No questions.
Tony?
So I have a few questions, so bear with me here. I may not understand all of this. So $1 million is like the magic number for the smallest bid package you want to put out. Is that right?
I found that if we can do $1 million worth of work, we get a lot of bids and it's much more competitive.
Okay. And so you've decided that it would be even better if we could do 1.4 million this time around.
So there's an escalation that you have to put into every bid that's under 30B, all right, for asphalt. So you have to assume some money for that. So we don't want to just kind of we want to make sure there's extra in case, gosh, God forbid, oil goes up more, right? And then we're going to end up paying this escalation cost. It's also, my estimate will bring it, I'll bid what I believe is about $1.4 million, or probably a little bit less, but it might come in lower, it might come in a little higher. So that's why the 1.4.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Joe?
Couple questions. Yeah, she started back out. One, the past line items have been more in the 300 range, correct?
The past
For the-
what?
In the past, the funding.
325 for the last couple of years.
325?
That's your question, right?
Yes, that was the question. So this would be an increase, which makes some sense. I would also make a statement that from sitting in and reading some of the things that are coming down the lane with the transit authority, the grants might get a little bit smaller for us. And I'd rather see us be a little bit more proactive in our funding right at the moment and hope that there are better grants coming forward. But I have a feeling that some of the state grants are going to try and put pressure on us to put in a transit zoning, which is what we've been investigating on the affordable housing side. They're going to attach some grant funding that may apply to streets in that area. And so increasing a little bit just in the short term to make sure that you have the money to do projects that we need to get done, I think makes a lot of sense. So that's really all I wanted to say.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, so I apologize, bear with me. So the current road maintenance balance of 636. Or if you said this, I'm just trying to wrap my arms around it. Is that a pretty firm number? Does that include, through today and projections through the end of June when the current year budget is used up, theoretically? Or is it project forward?
So the 636 is based on what is currently in road maintenance that we're not allocating to the various streets contract.
So, okay. Are there current projects going on right now that could use up some of that 636?
Yes.
Okay.
So if we have escalation costs that go beyond what we've already contingency that I've already put in, but that's all coming out of the road maintenance contingency money at this point.
So is there a high likelihood that 636 could be even lower come July 1?
I don't think so. My experience hasn't been that it would decrease very much from the project because we do have something built into the contingency.
Well, one of the things, Karen, especially, and I know we talked about it with the first phase of Main Street, is if there were any overages in certain areas and things like that, the town would have to bear those overages. And I assume that would continue for the second phase of Main Street as well. So wouldn't that be the biggest, the big area where you might see some overage?
It's possible we could see overage, but we're bearing all that cost because there is no state funding on that at all. So.
And then just looking at a list of streets that are up on the docket. I mean, I think you've mentioned this before, but none of these are state roads. They're all town roads, even Corderville.
Yes.
Okay. So this would even put a quarter of the chunk in, or a quarter of the, take out at least a quarter of the amount. Like, there's still significant work that needs to be done, and I'm sure this is growing each and every year. I mean, do you have? Is it
right? And this list this year, or what I have right now, is more roads that really just need a basic maintenance. They need paving. It's not really something that is high on our priority list for sidewalks or anything like that. So it's not. That's really a very straight paving list.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa?
Hi, Karen. Nice to see you. Well, kind of sort of see you. Just a couple quick things. So you've already allocated for going forward with this current year, Main Street, Newton Street, Deerfoot Flag, and St. Mark Street intersection. That's already been allocated with the funds that you currently have, correct?
That's
And-
correct.
And all of those projects are going to be forthgoing as soon as the paving and work season, construction season, I guess, starts. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so one of the things when you were in last time that we talked about was starting new projects with so many current projects going on. So if you have 1.4 million, whether the 400,000 stays or not, regardless, you have at least $1 million. Do you or the DPW have the bandwidth, to manage additional projects short of the, again, Main Street, Newton Street, Deerfoot Flag, and St. Mark Street intersection? Does the DPW have the bandwidth to take on some of these other projects this year?
So we will be able to, because like I said, they're really straight paving projects. There's not, we're not really constructing a sidewalk or doing additional new drainage on any of these roads. It's all, it's really shaping, repaving the road, shaping it, dealing with just the structures that need to be raised or any kind of repairs. But it's a very maintenance heavy. That list is very maintenance heavy. There's not, kind of at the bottom, there's some roads with no numbers next to them, because I said those are something bigger to be dealt with at another time.
Okay, so you could foresee using the 1.4 to pick off some of these other things that you currently have on the $5.3 million list. And the
Yes.
DPW has the bandwidth and can certainly move forward on some of these. Some of these are very old and outstanding roads, to say the least.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks. I don't have any questions for Karen, but maybe just two comments. One, I originally was of the belief that we shouldn't allocate anything until we know what we're going to use it for. So I do believe that there's benefit in allocating the full 400 for two reasons. One, I think we actually are going to get synergies beyond what Karen's responsible for, obviously circling back to the schools. But two, I think she is articulating a plan. So what I would propose we do is, Lisa, I'll put this in the select board's hands, but when we write the warrant article, presuming this were to move forward and everyone's supportive of it, that there be some process before road maintenance money is utilized, right, to articulate. So when Karen's going out to bid, for example, whether it be the select board that vets it, capital, or some other committee, that there just be a public presentation of, we're going out to bid and we think we're going to be able to accomplish at least this. Karen, I know you have concerns about publishing stuff, because what if the bid comes in too high and you have to cut some things back, or it comes in too short and you can add some things in. But I think general consensus around where it's going and where, whether it's 80 or 90% of it would do a lot for the transparency of how this money gets used. Candidly, taxpayers 5 years ago are funding a lot of what we're doing now. So now, while we all may think we're going to be taxpayers, 5 years from now, I do think we also have to be fair in terms of the burden we're putting on individual people. So if I were to make a motion, it would include some sort of caveat around that, with deferring to the select board of how they would want to govern that. But I just think, just watching what's gone on, I think we can build a lot more credibility into, I think we know the job you're doing, Karen, and know it's not an easy job. The second thing I would say is, not funding it this year may look really great from a tax rate perspective and really help solve everyone's budget problems. But we all know that this is, if not the largest, one of the largest requests that everyone is united on in this town, that we need more road maintenance, more sidewalks. I know this isn't really dealing with even some of the sidewalk issues, but I think it would be penny wise and pound foolish to try to solve a tax rate issue with this. I think there are other ways in an operational budget to solve a lot of what the town's going through. And I just think, regardless of where you stand on the stabilization, I think it would just not be prudent to not allocate this. So that's why I'm comfortable with the 400, moving forward with it, and also trying to also react to some of the feedback we've heard. So I don't know, Joe, I saw you put your hand up at some point during that.
Yeah, I could add to you until I'm doing the pothole dodge in my car here and there. So I'm 100% on board with you, Jason. But I was wondering, does any of your funding on any of these sorts of projects come from the local capital projects fund or MassWorks infrastructure program at any time?
We've never had from MassWorks, and I'm not sure what the other one is. So I think no.
Okay. All right. Those are some of the ones that are listed in the new transportation crunch if you don't apply the zoning. So maybe they won't affect us. So thanks.
I'll just add on MassWorks, Joe. We did do an expression of interest last year specific to the MassWorks program for Corderville Road, and we did get feedback on that. The period is open again, and we're being asked whether we want to put anything in related to that. I think the key item that we heard back last year is in the feedback process was before you submit a full application, you need to be shovel ready, which I think Karen can check that box, absent some public forums. But you have to be able to show imminent private development in the area impacted. And if you think about the area from the DPW down to the MBTA, I think the only projects that people were able to come up with are actually outside of this town using that road as opposed to this. So it may be an interesting angle nonetheless, because it is a state funded thing and we are, bringing cars through our town to get to major interchanges, et cetera. But that, to answer your MassWorks, I don't think it's lost on anyone. That's one of the greatest grants the state has. You just have to have a project aligned with it that's more private in nature.
Okay, yeah, because they're tying some penalties of the non-compliance with the new transit zoning overlay, and that's one of the programs that it's going to phase in over I think about a decade. But there are a couple programs that if you don't apply the zoning around the transportation hubs, that these programs are going to start to be very finicky about giving to people that don't apply, that don't have the zoning and aren't fulfilling the state's mission of housing at these hubs. So if it doesn't affect you, Karen, though, I'm all happy.
So I guess, does anyone have any other questions related to road maintenance? In the interest of making one motion, is there anyone that has a differing opinion of the one I outlined in terms of path forward here? All right, so I'm going to move that the Capital Planning Committee recommend $400K for road maintenance as part of the FY23 budget, subject to discussion by the Select Board around the proper means to vet the use of these funds before bids and expenditure.
Second that.
Any further discussion? All right, we will do a roll call vote. Lisa.
Same.
Jeff.
Aye.
Joe.
Aye.
Tony.
Aye.
And Karen.
Aye.
And Melanis will be aye as well. So that is 501.
Jason,
All
can I
right.
just say one thing?
Yes.
Just in case anybody's wondering why I keep abstaining on the votes. I'm not comfortable taking a vote here and then taking a vote on the Board of Selectmen. So happy to carry the message from here back to the Board of Selectmen, but I think it's proper. That's where I take my vote. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Karen, I think we're gonna be able to release you unless someone has anything else for you.
You got lucky tonight, Karen. Holy smokes.
Excellent. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Have a good night.
All right, I am gonna roll through the rest of 5, and roll might be a fast or slow depending upon the item. 5C, I can guarantee is hopefully quick. So spoke to Chief Paulus regarding the status of the Taser body camera program. To recall, we voted the concept, but knew that there was additional work that needed to be done in terms of funding sources, whether this is the right time, whether we just do tasers, which is an existing item, whether we then do body cameras, because they're all tied in together. The chief has recommended pulling this request in its entirety for this fiscal year. Main 2 reasons are as follows. The Taser program will continue, and he will deal with whatever he needs to deal with through his Harvard funds for the next fiscal year only. That's, a form of a pilot payment for those of you that don't know from Harvard. And then we'll revisit the more formal program once there's better clarity from the state around grant funds. And because we are in a collective bargaining year, this does have to be put into the collective bargaining agreement before we're eligible for any state grants. So thought it was prudent to hold off. Some of our neighboring communities are starting to see grant funds come in. It certainly will not fund the entirety of the program, but we need to solidify the step with the collective bargaining agreement first, which is in Mark and the select board's hands at this point. So are there any questions on that before I just make an official motion to remove it upon the recommendation of the police chief? All right, then I'm going to recommend that we remove the Taser body camera program from the FY23 capital plan and push it to FY24. There's a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio.
Aye.
Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Shoner.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Want them to see you.
Aye.
And Malinowski's aye.
You want to be on video?
And then Joe, you're not on mute.
Okay.
Oh, I wasn't on mute. I can be.
And I'll just mark just a reminder on that. It's also in the chief's operating budget. So as you work through that with advisory, it needs to come out of there as well. Okay, action on the ADA study recommendations. So I do see John is here. John, if you want to come in, great. Otherwise, I'm going to have Mark tee this up. But just raise your hand if you want to come in, John. But Mark, maybe if you can give the committee some background on what you're looking for here from us and where you want to go.
Sure. So just to refresh the committee, may recall that we had done an ADA Title II self-evaluation of all our buildings and facilities to determine where we're in compliance with accessibility issues and where we need some work. We did expand that to include the schools. We did receive a grant from the state, which significantly reduced our cost. We used some of the savings to help also get the school buildings in Southborough done. So we know the total of the things that need to be looked at. We're looking at about a total, I think, of about $750,000 on the town side for the repairs, things that need to be done. The majority of those items for the money, majority of that 750 really comes down to our fields and taking a look at access to the fields and access around the fields. Looking at our town buildings, the majority are signage and hardware. Putting new handles on, that people can grab, not the round knobs, changing out our signage, making sure it's at the proper height, making sure that it is properly marked so that it is usable for people who have difficulty seeing different height levels, things of that nature. some counter issues, some bigger issues in some of the buildings are bathrooms. And again, some of those are being addressed through other projects. You remember this committee supported and then town meeting agreed to support the bathroom renovation in the townhouse. And so a lot of the issues that were identified in the report are going to be corrected with that renovation. We had applied for an ADA grant each year. The Mass Office of Disability accepts applications for grant funding, usually between $25,000 and $40,000. We had applied for a grant that was going to provide the signage and the hardware for most of our buildings to be able to switch these things out. We would have the grant would have purchased the materials for us. Facilities staff would have put them on, would have made the transitions during the year to try to take these items off the checklist. Unfortunately, a lot of other people wanted money too, and we did not get the funds. But again, it's an annual grant, and we will continue to apply. The ADA committee, formerly ADA committee, which is now the Public Accessibility Committee, is looking to put a $50,000 earmark into this budget for capital to begin to address some of these issues that need to happen with regards to accessibility improvements in our buildings and also on our fields. Again, I think the fields are a separate discussion, and so I'd like to stick with the buildings. And because we did get the grant, I think that John Parent, our facilities director, would really like to use the 50 to continue or to begin doing some of the things that we intended to do with the grant, which is the signage and the hardware, looking at the elevation of counters, tables, addressing some issues with doorways, addressing some issues with glass in the doors. If you can't change the height of it, it needs to be frosted so that you can't see through. Things of that nature. And so that's really the path we're looking at. This is going to be something that I think you would see in multiple years. And until we can get a handle on this. And then as a second piece beyond this 50, I think, I'd like to have a conversation with, at least a member of the committee, and then to bring something back to the full committee as to, do we want to take a look at a larger approach to addressing some of the access issues to our playing fields and around our playing fields, and maybe look at combining them together, since it's the same issue in a number of locations, combining them together and try and address them in a larger article rather than simply, picking them off one at a time. So that's probably a broader brush than you were looking for, Mr. Chairman, but that's what I've got.
So basically, you're looking for a committee member to assist on the recreational components of this, I assume in collaboration with recreation, and you're looking for support for the 50K funding. Is that kind of the two requests you have tonight?
Yeah, so the request tonight is the support for the 50. And then, a second piece is to, try and work with this committee. And also, I think, it's important to bring in the accessibility committee to try and determine what's the best path forward for some of our recreational fields and facilities.
And I guess just in the interest of transparency, when Mark had asked for this item to be added to the agenda, I did reach out to Bill Sines, who's the chair of the Accessibility Commission. Is it commission or committee? It's
a Southborough Public Accessibility. I'm going to say commission.
Okay. So I did reach out to their chair as well as Bonnie Faniff, who had communicated a few times once the ADA study had been completed, just to make sure we had all the information as capital. And invited them to join us. Unfortunately, they weren't able to join us tonight, but obviously I can circle back with wherever we decide to go here. I guess my first thing would be, is there a committee member that would be willing to work with Mark and whoever the Accessibility Commission designates to really try to come up with, a more comprehensive plan of dealing with the items outside of what the intended purpose is of the 50K, like door handles and signages. So more around playgrounds, fields, et cetera, which is where the big dollar amount is. Tony?
So accessibility is near and dear to my heart, so I would help with this one.
Okay. Anyone else have any interest? All right. Consider yourself in, Tony. So Jeff, I'll ask you, sorry, Mark, I'll ask you to take that offline with Tony.
Sure.
Just to figure out, and obviously, Tony, when you're ready to come back to the committee for any action, just let me know and I'll put it on the agenda. And, happy to make an introduction for you as well with Bill and Bonnie in particular. I would also encourage you, if there is something that you want to do in the short term, sooner the better. But if there's this is a longer term thing that's going to go beyond obviously this town meeting, then obviously we can deal with it, at a future date. But just kind of an initial size up of where this should go, I think would be helpful. Okay. Now on the 50K, Mark or John, was there any method to how that number was arrived at, or was it kind of because that was what the grant was submitted for, we're just kind of carrying it forward here?
Well, Mrs. Faniff, on behalf of the committee, had asked for an earmark of 50, to kind of get things moving. I don't think it was 50 for a specific item or a specific number of items. But I think it was simply to try to do some of the work that the grant was intended to do in December.
Okay. And will there be another grant this year?
Yes, every year. And
So
we'll
theoretically,
apply.
if you got the grant, you'd be able to just accelerate some things more. It wouldn't be like a turn back to the town is probably what's going to happen, right? Like
Yeah.
you'd have 100,000 to work with as opposed to 50,000.
Right. So maybe we take a swing at some of the smaller mid-range mid-range projects. And one other thing I do want to add too, Jason, is and based on some of the discussions that this committee has had with your subcommittee with the school, we're going to focus our work on the buildings that we fully intend to keep in our portfolio. So, that doesn't mean we're not going to do work at Corderville and we're not going to do work at South Union, but we're not going to do any big items at those locations until we really get an idea of how this school capital subcommittee, wants to proceed.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the committee? All right, so I'm going to motion that we support the inclusion of the 50K placeholder that was put in by the Accessibility Commission for the FY23 budget. There a second?
Second.
There any discussion?
Mark. Bonnie put this in? Bonnie Faniff put this on there?
Yeah, on behalf of the committee, she'd requested the earmark.
Okay.
I think it's really important we start to do something. I have no idea how far 50 is going to get us, especially in this supply environment, but I think it's really important that we give John the method to advance, the things he can advance. And, I would expect a regular report back here of, what else is needed. But obviously, if some of the stuff we discussed last week in terms of buildings start to get consolidated here, I also hope that naturally that will take some items off the list that, we don't need to do in the future because we just won't be using those as public buildings. But that's to be seen.
Jason, can I sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
No, all I was going to say is one of the things to keep in mind is that, doing this Title II self-evaluation does give the town a certain level of protection because we're trying to be proactive about addressing these issues. So if someone files a complaint, you know, they want to know, have you done an evaluation? And then the next question is, what have you done with the items that were identified in the self-evaluation? Because again, it's kind of a living document that you continue to, you know, you fix things, other things get added on, you address other things. And so the question is going to be, what have you done? And to the point that was just made, you know, we really want to start addressing these items to show that we're being proactive. It's not that the intention is not that you need to get this all done in 24 months. The intention is that it's something that you should be working towards, you know, you know, on a fairly consistent basis. So that's what we're trying to do, is just to get this going. Sorry,
Jason,
Lisa.
can I ask? No, that's okay. See, I had, unfortunately, I stepped away for a second. I had to take a phone call, and I don't know if Mr. Parent or maybe through you, Mr. Purple, had the opportunity to just touch base on some of the things that have already been done that, you know, since the report came out. And Mark, I apologize. Like I said, I had to step away for a second to take a call. So if you touched on this already, fine to move on. If not, if John wanted to just take a minute or two and just kind of touch on some of the things he's done.
It was not touched on, so John, if you're up for it, question's yours.
How y'all doing? Basically, we've done a lot of the very small things right now, like basically clearing pathways, clearing off workspaces, relocating items, basically short stuff like that. The goal here is to maximize whatever funds we get to do this stuff. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a big fan of going out if we don't have to go out. Right now, as you know, we have a staff of only 3. And so a lot of this is going to be fill work. So the goal is to pick the projects that we can fit into the schedule right now to keep doing it throughout the year, to keep people busy at all times. Now, that being said, there's always going to be projects you're going to run into that are going to require bigger things. If you start attacking concrete ramps and stuff, those got to go out to bid. When it comes to doorknobs, frosting glass and stuff like that, the goal is over the next year, and actually by the end of this fiscal year, we have quite a few projects we're going to try to bang out in advance of that period. Again, it's the small stuff. I don't want to go down to Courteville Hall and start ripping out bathrooms until you know what's going on with Courteville Hall. You know, there are certain projects that you can hold off a little longer, others you can't. We've already done the break room up at the library. It wasn't ADA compliant, but since we're painting the library, we said, oh, now's the opportunity. Took out the old cabinets, put new cabinets in, new ADA height sink, cabinet hardware. The goal has always been, when we're doing projects, to make sure we build things to ADA compliance. That's always been the goal. The hard part is now retrofitting things. And that's what these funds are going to be used for. You know, it is a long process. To Mr. Purple's point, it's not something people expect you to get done in 24 months. It's just not one of those things. It's a pretty sizable list, especially when you take the fields into consideration. So basically, that's the stuff we've been working on, and moving forward, that's what we hope to continue to do. Just keep trying to bang away at the list.
Great, John. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Most welcome.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Abstain.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Joner.
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. All right, 501 on that. John, thanks for joining us. Mark, thanks for bringing it forward. And Tony, we'll get you linked up to advance the other piece of this.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Have a great
Jason?
night.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Jason? Jason? So unfortunately, I need to drop off. I think you'll
Okay.
still have a quorum if I go, correct?
We will, and we're probably going to do 2 quick more items and call it a night and schedule a follow-up meeting.
Okay, so I wish you all a very pleasant evening, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks for
Good
joining
Night,
us.
Tony.
Okay. Next, Breakneck Hill. Mark, this is you again.
So he's dropping off just before the 42-page report that I'm going to go through. No, again, I'll be, I'm the understudy for Melissa Danza, our conservation agent, who does an amazing job, you know, with our Conservation Commission. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this Breakneck Hill Conservation Area. It's been in the town's portfolio for about 42 years. Since early on, from the time that it was owned, it used to be, it was a farm. It was an orchard, a pasture land. And it was discovered that there was somewhat of a farm dump that was up there. There was some materials from the farm. There was some old machinery, things of that nature. From the late 80s on, the town has done some test pits and some monitoring wells to ensure that any materials were not leaching out of the dump area. There is a private homeowner downhill and wanted to ensure that their water source is not being negatively impacted. And to date, everything has been fine. There's been no issues. However, in the past 4 or 5 years, this issue has really started to become active again with some members of Conservation Commission and Board of Health. Former Health Director Paul Pazinski had some conversations with DEP about this. And DEP is now coming around to, their way of thinking that it's time for the town to begin to look to clean this up. And so through Conservation Commission, they have been having conversations with Ms. Danza about administrative consent order. And if you're not familiar with that, it's essentially a document that would be signed between the town through the Board of Selectmen and DEP. That would require the town to clean this up, would give a kind of a schedule of when certain things need to be done, and the costs of those things, as for per task. So obviously at this point, there's some things that need to be done before that ACO is signed, but it's anticipated that's probably going to be signed somewhere in the next 3 to 4 months. There will be some things that we're required to do in fiscal 23. We do have a licensed site professional that has been engaged and working through Conservation Commission to try and help navigate this process of the administrative consent order with DEP. It appears that the initial allocation for fiscal 23 that they're looking at is just under $60,000. And that is going to be the preparation and filing of a notice of intent for the work in and near the wetland resources for test pits and sampling activities, completing asbestos survey and inspection, and preparing the final summary report. The issues with using a certified asbestos inspector, is really driving this number up, a little bit more with some of the requirements that DEP is looking for. So it could be as low as, as 35 or 40, or it could be closer to the 60, but this is, but the number that the LSP is putting on it at this point is closer to $60,000. This is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, in terms of the funding. Obviously the actual cleanup and I'm assuming removal of the material and the remediation of the site is probably going to be significantly more expensive. So this is just helping to get us started in the right direction. And again, we'll know more once we see the administrative consent order, once the licensed site professional is able to really get a hold of this and understand all of the tasks, and then to be able to provide us some cost estimates for this project. But again, this is the beginning, and wanted to just bring before the committee the item that needs to be dealt with for the coming fiscal year.
Before we get too detailed, I just wanted to acknowledge we got this memorandum 3-ish hours before the meeting. So I've already indicated to Mark when he sent it over, I'm not ready to vote on this tonight. And I think that, I would schedule a follow-up meeting. We have some more topics other than this. It's becoming very clear to me. But I wouldn't certainly be opposed as the town works through budgeting cycles, that because this doesn't have a placeholder, in there, that there should be a placeholder there. And it should be caveated very much like we just dealt with on the roads. Mark and Brian had put a placeholder in there, but it was very clearly caveated that capital hadn't voted on it. I could certainly live with that for tonight to just give us some time to work through it. I'd rather do it that way than rush a vote and not do our diligence, and or not put it in just because we haven't voted yet, and have a last minute surprise where the rate just ticks higher than one person wants it to be on any board or committee, and it just causes unnecessary discussion. So that was going to be my proposed path forward, knowing that I personally hadn't read it, and don't imagine anyone else had read it yet.
Yeah, and this information had just, in fairness to Ms. Danza, this information just came in. The LSP had put something together briefly on Friday, just saying, here's what the pricing, might look like, but we don't have any comments back from DEP. And then later that afternoon, comments came back from DEP on a draft administrative consent order. So it's really still a very fluid process, but unfortunately we need to plan, to some extent as to, what the funding source is, what we're going to need for fiscal 23.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Just a quick thing, Mark. So is there a placeholder or is there not a placeholder?
It would be it's in capital.
That's what I thought. Okay, I just wanted to check. Thank you.
But there's a placeholder in the warrant. There's not in any budget scenario that Mark or Brian have presented to date. So I guess what I'm proposing, Lisa, is that Mark include the 60 for purposes of upcoming presentations to other boards and committees, until, with the caveat like we just had on roads. So he'll remove the asterisk from one and add it to another.
Okay, thank you.
Does everyone agree with that? All right, I don't think a motion is needed on that. So Mark, unless you have anything else on that, I'm going to move on.
No, I think that's fine. I think if we want to get into more detail and everything, I would probably be a good idea to have Ms. Danza join us for a subsequent meeting.
Okay, so once we decide on a date here shortly, I think we should give her a heads up and just let her come and answer any questions. Okay, I'm going to go back to 4, and I promise I'm going to cut this in a second, but there are just some things that while we're convened, I think we need to go over very quickly. So under chair and members report, the school research subcommittee is meeting tomorrow. There's 2 purposes to that meeting. One is to review a presentation on the impact of funding with and without the MSBA. We learned earlier today that the MSBA will be giving us a verbal decision next week. So this is all really coming together one way or another very soon. The school research subcommittee will also be reviewing the report that will be presented to the school committee on February 9th. So what I need to understand from this committee is whether you'd like me to jointly post. And Lisa, before I ask anyone else, I think the question comes down to, what is the select board going to want on this? I know you can't speak on their behalf, but writing the report, part of our charge requires a report if we're going to stay true to the school committee, capital planning, advisory, and the select board. So I don't know if you have any thoughts yet, but that will have the recommendation of the subcommittee in it, and we'll obviously chart our path forward unless someone doesn't agree with that path or votes against it.
So I guess the question, Jason, you're asking is as far as the report.
Yes.
Yes, I'm just, okay.
Yeah, so the subcommittee, which is Katura, Kathy, and myself,
Yeah,
will make a presentation to the full school committee in their regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay.
It's the main topic, like I think it was a lighter agenda, is what I at least understood to date. So I think there's 2 paths forward. Just let the subcommittee present to the school committee that night.
mhm,
Don't jointly post, but once we know what the school committee's view on that is, then have a full presentation back to selectmen, advisory, and capital planning all at the same time, and invite the school committee to join us. That's where I was leaning, but I didn't want to.
Nope, that's fine,
Okay.
Jason.
Okay.
Yep, perfect.
So
Thank
I
you.
am not going to post a meeting for that date for this committee. Just so everyone's aware, unless someone has a burning desire to hear it, then they do record all of that. Everyone good on that? Okay. I will forward the presentation once it's voted on by the subcommittee. SHOPC subcommittee, Joe, anything?
We have all agreed that all indications of the site is developable for affordable housing. The next meeting, the chair should introduce a structure for a report to the select board, and we will start filling in the dots and finish up the last of the research that we need to do on a couple of fronts. So that should be coming relatively soon. ARPA did not have all the members. So ARPA did not vote to nominate leadership yet. We are meeting tomorrow to get that done. So hopefully we'll have the remaining 2 members in, and we'll get that done and get ourselves started. There certainly is a lot of information, and one of the members volunteered to put together some criteria for qualification of projects and capital items off the legislation. So, or information from the legislation. So we'll have a better idea of what things may qualify as well.
So I just encourage you to make sure you have access to the town's consultant that's been hired on the lost revenue piece of that. It could greatly simplify your job, but I'll let Mark and Lisa facilitate that discussion. And then SHOPC, is there anything forthcoming to town meeting, or is it way too early to tell? I don't think any placeholders, right?
Not that I'm aware of now.
Okay. Okay. Any questions for Joe on those 2 committees? All right. FY22 vehicle request. I just wanted to let you know that I reached out to Chief Paulus, Chief Achilles, and Karen, who all have vehicles, realizing the supply shortage I think a lot of you commented in various comments to the school administration tonight. I asked them to refresh their vehicle quotes for the forthcoming town meeting. So by our next meeting, they should have an updated quote just to make sure nothing's changed and we're not underfunding them, through no fault of their own. Obviously, I think there's some supply issues that are beyond their control, but I think we need to have an accurate cost of what's going to happen there. Let's talk about a next meeting date, and then I just need to talk about a few things on space needs to happen between then, and then I'll punt all these other items. So I know we've had 2 long meetings in 5 days, or what is the committee's appetite for 2 weeks from now? It'll be a much shorter meeting, but it'll just be to knock off kind of the remaining items. So it'd be Monday, February 7th.
I'm
I
good,
can
Jason.
the most fun things I do in a week. So let's have at it.
I think too, once we get through all of this and we get closer to town meeting, when summer comes, there's going to be less meetings. Unfortunately, it's like this for every board and committee before town meeting. It's just kind of a crunch to get everything done. So I appreciate everybody and all the time and energy that you've put in. Absolutely.
We're not
I might
trying to
be-
become. Go ahead, Karen. Sorry.
I might be 15 minutes late to that meeting.
If we agree it's gonna be a shorter meeting, does anyone oppose to starting at 7:45 or 8?
That works. Yeah. That's
All
actually,
right. Karen, you name the time then, 7:45 or 8?
8, please.
Okay, we'll commit to an hour meeting. How's that sound for everyone?
perfect.
Okay. And I know it's late, but I feel like because it's so fresh in everyone's mind, I think we need to just discuss quickly. If there's anything that anyone wanted to raise coming out of the space needs presentation from last week, any feedback you've heard, and or otherwise I'll kind of walk through what I would propose as the next steps, coming out of that, given, I'll call it the momentum we had with the audience. Is there any feedback? All right. Lisa, you're always a source of feedback. I was hoping you'd have something.
Happy to provide some if you really want some.
No, no, it's so Mark or I have to probably connect with Ken and Courtney just to figure out what they're planning to include in their final report. My intention was to send an email out to the department heads in particular the boards and committees that did post jointly with us, but I think there was a few, like select board, at least I know you had mentioned something during the meeting, just giving them a firm deadline. So everyone's working on the same page of, if you have any comments that you'd like incorporated, just offering that, just so that, in fairness to Ken and Courtney, they are working on a fixed fee. And they clearly have earned, in my opinion, every dollar that we're paying them. If you knew how many times they met with certain groups, it just was amazing. There was no scope creep conversation that any of us in consulting are very used to. It was all what's in the best interest of the town. So I do think we owe it to them to kind of wrap this pretty quickly. Obviously, there will be future phases if that's the direction we all go. But I did want to comment that I do think we need to kind of keep control of how this moves forward in terms of messaging. And I think we were pretty tight on the messaging leading up to it. We vetted certain things with certain groups, but make sure that other groups aren't off doing their own plans. And what I've offered to, in particular, the groups that have raised concerns either during the pre-public meeting or during the public meeting, one last chance, right, to get anything out there. But I think just listening to some of the comments, I think there were some comments that I entirely expected and I think were completely valid. I think there were other groups that were looking at very fine details that, didn't align with kind of the neighborhood concept that I had outlined at the beginning of the meeting. And I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that there's thousands of square feet that's really not allocated in that building yet. And that would be the purpose of a building committee if this were to move forward. So I plan to reinforce that in the messaging, but I really wanted to make sure the committee didn't have any additional messaging that they heard coming out of, especially the public comment, because that's the toughest part, right? You listen to that, and obviously it's raw emotion to some that haven't seen the plan before as well. But it's obviously, like I had mentioned, phase 0. So that was my plan, and maybe have a report to accept at the next meeting, but it would just welcome any other comments or feedback.
Jason, I'll just share that Mr. Purple did send a note out to the Board of Selectmen, Select Board, whichever we're calling ourselves today, on Friday, that any questions or comments would go through him. And I believe, Mark, you put the deadline is tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So, but I have not received anything to date. Maybe everybody's really happy.
That's it. Everybody's happy. So just that information, Jason. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is something that we all know, which is the big gorilla in the room is whether Woodward could be turned over for another purpose anyway, whether it's by the schools or by the town. So if that doesn't happen, then most of those scenarios go out the window, and we're left with a whole bunch of other decisions. So
yeah, which is I think why that February 9th meeting is so critical, because that's not the recommendation. What we heard last week is the recommendation's already been voted at the subcommittee. There's a clear path. It's just a matter of how much that path costs. All right, I'm going to skip every other item on the agenda and just acknowledge that we have members of the public, so offer public comment before adjourning. Is there any public comment? I am seeing none, so I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All right, second by Lisa. Roll call vote, Braccio,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski is